Welcome back to Regency Rumors. I'm Kayla, and I am not actually in my normal setup today. I'm in the beautiful Yorkshire countryside. We are away for the weekend with friends. My husband Jordan is finishing off a D&D campaign, and so we are in a lovely Airbnb, and I actually took some video footage of what our view is like for this weekend. And so I thought it would be fun to film from somewhere else so that we can go ahead and get started talking about the House of Guinness. If you're new to this channel, then I talk about period dramas, history, and historical fiction, and I have been behind on watching the House of Guinness, but I've just binge watched it, better late than never, and I really want to have a chat about it, and I'm gonna put on my historian hat for a bit of this video. A lot of my research in my PhD was focused on industrial heritage and working class community stories, especially in the Victorian era. My research was actually on a castle that was featured in the House of Guinness, so I'm going to talk about why it was chosen, a little bit about politically and socially what was going on during this time across the UK and Ireland, and how families like the Guinnesses were so instrumental in both progress and strife during this time period. But I'm also going to talk about the fun stuff too, the steaminess, the actors, Anthony Boyle, the man that you are, and why I think history is the key to why Americans and British viewers love the House of Guinness and the Irish critics did not. So let's get into it. So first up, we're going to talk about the look and feel of the House of Guinness. Visually, the House of Guinness is absolutely stunning. It's glossy, it's cinematic, and honestly gorgeous to look at. They really did a good job at portraying, how magnanimous the Guinness empire was with that, beginning shot of people working in the warehouse and the clanking and the fog and the smog, and then in between shots of ballrooms and lavish apartments and estates. To me, this is Netflix being like, Downton Abbey is well and truly over, so is The Crown. We need a competitor to The Gilded Age, but make it scream sexy and edgy and my problem is that sometimes nowadays it feels like they're trying too hard with all of this. It's starting to feel like Netflix and streaming platforms in general are caught in this loop where everything has to look perfect. The sets are immaculate, the lighting is golden, the costumes are perfectly steamed. And while that works beautifully in something like Bridgerton or The Buccaneers, where the tone is intentionally lightened and playful and almost fantasy-ish in a way, it feels a bit strange with the House of Guinness, where a show is supposed to be about legacy and class and power in Ireland after the Great Famine, in the thick of the Industrial Revolution. The sets look like sets to me. They're breathtaking, sure, but I can tell that they are curated production designs. Like you're watching the actors move around in a museum exhibit instead of like living, breathing spaces. So compare that to something like North and South or The Mill, both about industrial Britain, where the air feels heavy with soot and you can practically smell the damp around. Even the older BBC shows had a lot of like texture to them that I don't see with Netflix. The Wind That Shakes the Barley, you believe those people exist in those landscapes. In the House of Guinness, everything just feels airbrushed. I'm not trying to single out House of Guinness, other period dramas that Netflix have made. The Leopard that's set in Italy around the same time looks like it's, a part of this Netflix Bridgerton effect where everything looks really polished and really perfect. We're entering an era where even smog and debris are romanticized. Every Victorian chimney now glows like it's curated for Instagram. There is something about this kind of Netflix effect that feels very polished that even Peaky Blinders didn't have, and I don't know how to exactly pinpoint my finger on it, but there's just something that makes me feel like it's almost more akin to like a video game setting than a show where people are moving and living and breathing in a space together that feels realistic to me. Don't get me wrong, a little atmosphere is fine, and I love a bit of thematic Victorian smog, but it's gotten to the point where poverty and pollution and overcrowding is looking cinematic instead of suffocating. And that's the thing. I don't hate it. It's beautiful, it's escapism, and it's clearly a treat for the eyes. I also feel like that's very much the point. They weren't setting out to give us a brutal, gritty portrait of Ireland's social divide. They wanted something that looked sleek and feels expensive and has that glossy prestige drama sheen to it. But if the goal is to make this edgy, sexy show with, over-the-top sets and slow motion stares over tumblers of whiskey, I do think we should ask ourselves the question as to why. What is it about our current culture that makes us want to turn very real, very tense, very serious historical events into something that's seductive, something that's very intentionally marketable? There's this trend lately where we're not just fictionalizing history, we're rebranding it for a social media era. These stories aren't just retellings, they're transformations, into something that's cool. And they don't leave out the political stories, but at the end of the day, the family still walks away looking super cool with edgy music. Audiences today are used to bingeable, aspirational dramas focused on castles and wealth. The messier the morality, the better it performs. People love stories of aristocracy because it's exciting and interesting, and that's never going to change. I'm not suggesting that it should. It's just that the glossy filter and the edgy modern music sometimes makes these very serious stories feel unsettling. Now, there are aspects of the working class that is covered on the show that I think was good, and I am going to get to that. But overwhelmingly, the point of the show is to get you to view the Guinnesses as an edgy, cool family. But here, when you use the Guinness name, a name that carries huge historical weight in Ireland, and then you make that story sexy and stylized, it blurs the lines between critique and celebration to me. It's like we're not sure whether or not we're supposed to be horrified by the wealth and power, or we wish we lived in it no matter the cost. That to me says something about where we are as a society right now. We're obsessed with turning legacy and controversy into entertainment value. We don't just want to understand history, we want to wear it, we want to post it, we want to drink it. We want to be able to watch the aesthetic of rebellion, the glamorous side of corruption, but without sitting too long with the discomfort and the consequences that comes with that. I'd much rather let the acting and the story speak for themselves. If we happen to find them edgy or the characters a bit irresistible, then great, that's our choice as the audience. That's part of the fun. It's like how I fell for these brooding period drama men, Mr. Thornton in North and the South, and Mr. Rochester and Jane Eyre. But the key difference is that we decide they're compelling. The show didn't overtly tell us to. It wasn't hammered into us that we should find them cool or sexy. It happened naturally because of the writing and their performances, earned us feeling that way. That's where I'm really struggling with shows like House of Guinness. It's not that they, need to be dreary or historically accurate all the time, but it feels like that we are being forced to feel a certain way about these characters based on the music, the modern shots, and the aesthetic, the slow pans of them walking into buildings with screaming music, that sort of thing. I feel like that audiences determine whether or not people are cool. And if you let these actors do their job with great dialogue, and still put in some entertaining and edgy music here and there, but their messaging doesn't need to be so overt. We as an audience can decide if these characters are really cool or they're really irresistible. If you let the story speak for itself, that's what will happen. Audiences will decide that these characters are that way. We don't need for it to be forced upon us, if that makes any sense. One thing that I found really interesting, and it's subtle but meaningful, is that the wording at the top of every episode says, this fiction is inspired by true events, not inspired by real events. That distinction is small to me, but it is fascinating. So, inspired by real events signals a direct connection to historical events. Shows that use that phrasing are basically saying, this happened more or less. We're telling the story as close or closest to possible with a lot of artistic license. So think The Crown, which famously caused controversy because even small fictionalized moments felt misleading. When people question whether or not certain private conversations actually happened, because how would they know? By contrast, inspired by true stories, that immediately gives the creators more freedom. Stories rather than events don't necessarily have to be factual. They can be true in the sense that, someone has told this story before, but a story is not an event. It's a heads up that the show is interested in themes and characters and ideas rather than strict historical accuracy. They're telling a story that draws from reality, but they're not claiming reality. I think that wording sets the tone for the rest of this show. The modern Irish music, the occasional bold text that appears in different sizes, like they do on TikTok, where they're putting up subtitles for the Irish language. I actually think that some of those aspects were really cool and different. I enjoyed it when they would slap up the modern equivalent of the Guinness's wealth, because they know that what's going to happen is people are going to Google it on their phones. They're going to get lost in scrolling and then come back 3 minutes later when something important has already happened, and they're going to get lost in the story. And so they're like, well, why don't we just put up the modern equivalent of what they would have been making or earning at the time, which I think in some ways is kind of clever. That said, I do wonder how all of that will age. I'm desperate for new period dramas that feel like classics 10 to 20 years from now. And I can't help but feel like some of these shows, are being made a bit like fast fashion. They're glossy, they're trendy, and they're designed for immediate appeal. The cool, edgy music over historical scenes has been done before, Peaky Blinders type thing. Maybe it is a little overdone, in my opinion, but I do love how they focused on featuring music from Irish artists, and for that to be a key aspect of the series, and that the Irish language was included in a way more bolder way. I think this is maybe the first time that the Irish language with subtitles has been included in a big show. If you know of any others, please let me know, especially period dramas, but I think this might be the first. So I really like that they did prioritize that. I think modern music can be a subliminal way for these shows to signal to people that, a time period isn't boring, or like, this is a moment that was meant to be like cool back in the day without needing massive explosions or magic or technology to make it seem cool. So I'm not mad about it. Is it revolutionary in this series? No, but I can see the reasons why they are trying to use it. So briefly, I'm going to talk about the casting. I am not an expertise on this side of things, but I feel like the cast was really strong. Anthony Boyle, the man that you are, you could put him in all period dramas. He is born to be in period dramas. I have no idea where this man came from, but one day he started showing up in all these historical shows, and I am not mad about it. If you have not seen him as John Wilkes Booth in Apple TV's The Manhunt, go and watch it right now. He is so good as that character. I'd love to see him in more like maybe a romance role or a rom-com. He's been in a lot of serious things, and especially ones where his life ends in like controversial tragedy, or he's like trying to solve a mystery, or, in this, it's about this very edgy, controlling, powerful family. So I feel like it would be really cute to see him in like a historical romance or a contemporary rom-com. I would totally be up for it. But yeah, he is definitely the period drama man of the moment. And I don't know where he came from, but all of a sudden he's here and he is welcome to stay. I will say I've come around to view Louis Partridge differently because of this role, because I was struggling with him being cast as Mr. Wickham in the new Netflix Pride and Prejudice because he's so young and boyish. And not that that's a bad thing, it's just more that I believed that it was crucial for the age gap between Mr. Wickham and Lydia to be very visible to audiences, so that we could see how creepy and manipulative it was for a grown man to, go after and eventually marry a teenager. I do still believe that he could pass as a teenager at times, which makes it hard for me to see him as someone who would have grown up alongside Mr. Darcy and also be in like his late 20s, early 30s. Jack Lowden has been cast as Mr. Darcy and he's in his late 30s, and Louis Partridge is 22. There definitely looks to be a big age gap between them, to be honest. However, his performance in this shows that he can play mature characters and play a really, nuanced character like Edward Guinness. And I think he'll be a good Mr. Wickham. I will be interested to see how that they're going to play that dynamic between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy and Wickham, just because I feel like you can tell there's an age gap between these two actors, and what are you gonna do about that? I'm guessing that they're going to just have it to where Mr. Wickham is in a different age range than Mr. Darcy is, because there is no way that they're gonna pull off saying that these two guys are like the same age. Lastly, I just wanted to say that I'm so happy that Jack Gleeson decided to come out of acting retirement for this. He said that after Game of Thrones that he was done with acting, so I wasn't expecting to see him in anything. And then when he popped up in this, I was like, oh my gosh, like his performance in this, I think, is the best, bar maybe Anthony Boyle's, might be the best in the series. He was so naturally this character that it's one of those storylines where I felt like I was really immersed in the show, because he was believable as this kind of ambitious family fixer who is unpredictable and a risk taker and shakes up the power balances in society in this powerful family at the time. So I think this is a brilliant role for him, and it proves to me why, he should be on our screens more. So I'm excited to see him in season 2 if it gets renewed. Okay, so we have got to talk about the Irish media reaction to the House of Guinness versus the American and British reviews. On the whole, I can see why Irish critics had an issue with the series. One review described the rebels as they dress and speak like feral leprechauns and declared the show had an, at best, rudimentary understanding of Ireland's experience of colonialism. Americans on the whole find something like this aspirational and lush and cinematic, and in a lot of ways that's very intentional. Some of my research has been in looking into how, money and investment is put into heritage tourism for Ireland and Scotland and Wales more specifically yearly. So for a lot of tourism places, Ireland and Scotland are willing to lean into the more watered down versions of culture. The tartans, the leprechauns, St. Patrick's Day, William Wallace, bagpipes, etc. for their respective countries. They also spend millions upon millions in heritage tourism research to attract tourists from immigration backgrounds such as America and Australia who have generational ties. And on the whole, it's going to make sense to lean into things like the Blarney Stone or the Guinness family than like exploitation and mass immigration. This show having a sleek, glamorous family saga of the Guinness dynasty could boost tourism and maybe make people come to the brewery in Dublin. But nationally, many Irish viewers could feel like it sanitizes or romanticizes history tied to colonial wealth and class disparity or family privilege. The Guardian's Ireland correspondent, Rory Carroll, wrote, "They hate the depiction of Ireland's history. Hate the dialogue, hate the costumes, hate the lighting." Netflix announced that it was the first show to have Irish subtitles, and still the critics hate it. So I'm going to try and speculate why that might be. I am not a historian of Irish history. I have a PhD in Welsh history, but around some kind of similar themes and the time period that is portrayed in the House of Guinness. There are similarities in things like migration and working class life, strikes, religious politics, language loss between the Irish and the Welsh. So I am used to exploring how stories of labor and migration and identity are told and retold and sometimes flattened for entertainment and especially for tourism purposes. That background gives me a useful lens for, reading the reaction of the House of Guinness and why Irish responses have been so different to those in the US and the UK. So as someone who's been focused on telling more multi-layered stories of landscapes and industry connected with the working class, I really spot when they've become background characters or side characters of their own narratives. Almost exclusively in the House of Guinness, when we see working class people, so not just like blurred extras in the brewery, they're almost always framed as an angry mob. They're shouting, they're throwing things, they're attacking the police, or there's this constant message of the working class equals dangerous and chaotic. And that's basically the only depiction we get besides when Anna goes to Clún Boo, and I'll get to that in a second, but for the most part, either the working class are silent and dirty, just background atmosphere, or they're violent. There is very little in between. No domestic life, no humorous moments, no tenderness between families, no complexity. The only real exceptions are Ellen Cochrane and her brother, but even they feel strangely disconnected from any sort of community. Yes, Ellen's flat is a bit tattered, but the show immediately pivots into romance. Her scenes become more about her chemistry with Edward than her motivations for joining the Fenians. She has no fully developed why for doing the things that she does. Her brother also has no fully developed why. We're told they're radicals, but we're never shown the everyday conditions that might make their risks feel urgent or necessary. And that has consequences, because when a show only depicts the working class, activism as rage without context, audiences are pushed to believe that these characters are irrational or even villainous. Their whole story becomes that they are violent. Irish communities had a long tradition of putting on music events and storytelling and community gatherings. If events like the Great Famine impacted that, and now all that they do is labor, we should be shown what an impact something like that had on the community, right? On their day-to-day, on their connections with each other. They shouldn't just be seen, exclusively through throwing things at other people. So for instance, in terms of my research, some Welsh working class communities, such as mining communities or quarrying communities, had really creative outputs outside of just their everyday working lives. So these were communities who established choirs to raise money for strike efforts. They held political debates during lunch hours. They had poetry contests and festivals called Eisteddfods. Half the time in these period drama shows, they show the working class as people who had nothing to live for, and they were listless and violent constantly, as if they had no lives. But that simply wasn't the case. In times where things get desperate, some of the reasons for why they would be angry is that they were being paid awful wages. The work was dangerous and they had no safety measures in place. They, developed long-term illnesses. They had deaths in the family. Children were working. When we see these people angry, it's because they're not able to live the fuller lives that they'd love to have. Not just that their normal state of being is mad and violent. We're told Ellen is a Fenian. We're told she believes in the cause, but we're never really shown her why. She talks about it a bit, but we don't see the personal aspects of that in a real way for her. No personal stakes because she doesn't really have a community in any way. She's always isolated in these scenes with Edward. So when she takes risks for her beliefs, the audience doesn't really have anything to hold on to. We don't understand her. We just watch her. So I want to contrast that with a show that actually does this really well. And that is a show that I talk about a lot here on the channel, which is North and South. It's a BBC series, I think, from about 2004. If you've never seen it, go and watch it. So there's this side character named Nicholas Higgins, and he's a mill worker. He's a union organizer. He's trying to protect the people that he works with to get better pay, get better working conditions. I think also to obviously get the children out of the workhouses. And we're experiencing his world, his cramped home that he has too many children in. He has a daughter who is dying from an industrial lung disease. He's taking care of another man's children that's cramping the house. He interacts with other workers about his fear of not providing if the strike fails. His daughters also have many scenes talking about the struggles within the community and, his and his family's moral reasonings behind the strike. We see his heart and we see his why. We see his stakes. We see the cost of taking action in his community behind closed doors. So when the strikes turn heated in North and South, we don't go, oh no, the angry, awful mob. We go, oh no, these people are at the brink of desperation. We feel sympathy when they get upset because we've been given enough humanity to understand the why behind why they're so angry. It makes these characters way less flat and one-dimensional. But in the House of Guinness, we get none of that. We don't really see a lot of the family stories, no community bonds in Dublin, no day-to-day survival, just the mobs. So instead of seeing, real people pushed to the brink, we get nameless villains who exist just to make the Guinness family look like victims. Because the show leans so hard into the romance and the melodrama and the visual aspects, the working class struggle becomes an aesthetic, not a part of the story. What I will say is thank goodness that we do have these scenes from Clune Boo, because if we didn't, this whole series would just be a story of a family against an angry mob. What is not shown in a lot of these period dramas is the dynamic between estate owners and locals and the tensions that can arise. So this castle is actually the castle that my PhD is on. It's called Penrhyn Castle in North Wales. So I know a lot about it. But apparently the real Ashford Castle is a luxury hotel now, so Penrhyn was a great stand-in. And story-wise, to be honest, there are a lot of sentimental parallels as well. So in the story of the House of Guinness, you see this powerful dynasty removed from daily reality of the people who live and work under them on the estate. And that separation echoes very clearly in history across the UK. The Pennant family who owned Penrhyn Castle in North Wales, they were also the owners of the largest slate quarry in the world at the time in the Victorian era. Penrhyn Castle, like Ashford, was the result not of an old castle from Norman rule, but a carefully crafted Victorian rebuilding of that style to signify wealth and status and to be a foreboding symbol, like the real castles of old. But built off of things like slavery in the case of Penrhyn, but then, beer for the Guinnesses. Penrhyn Castle sat grandly above the quarries, yet the owners, were often absentee. They spoke English, while the quarrymen spoke Welsh and lived lives far removed from the daily grind of slate dust and wage struggle. The show does a strong job of showing that tension, of lords living in stately homes, investing in image more than community sometimes, while the working class carry the burden of industry and poverty and identity. Because when your ruling family rarely speaks your language, is very far removed from your local area, even though they own like a castle there, it can turn into resentment and fracture. And that's what happened with Penrhyn Castle in a lot of ways. And we see that with the Guinnesses and Ashford Castle and the nearby community. The series show, for example, how major events like famine or unrest force, those at the top to realize their role beyond extraction, that their wealth has consequences closer to home than they think. If you would like to know more about Penrhyn's history because you care about a random filming location, I have an entire podcast series about it that I hosted back during COVID, where I interviewed historians and archaeologists and heritage professionals, volunteers at Penrhyn Castle about the story of the Penrhyn estate. So not just the owners, but so many of the people that lived and worked on the estate and made it truly what it is today. So if you're interested, go to podpenrhyn.co.uk. The podcast is called Podladiad Penrhyn. So if you look that up, then you'll find it streaming wherever you listen to your podcasts. I do think it was important for Edward and Anne and Adelaide to go back to the area to actually see what it was like, for Edward to be called out by Adelaide for being performative about his helping the local area. But we don't often see that complex dynamic in period dramas. And so I do have to say, I was glad that they put that storyline in there, and it gave us a chance to encounter the Irish language more. So I think that was really good. I do think sometimes storytelling was a bit overt in this, but I think that shows everywhere nowadays. And until we quell our obsession with being on our phones all the time, that's not going away, unfortunately. Overall, though, I think the pacing was good. Strong character beats. It's just at times you could tell that the writers were making sure that modern audiences get it, right? Which to me can flatten the nuance. And one thing I do appreciate about the House of Guinness is that it doesn't pretend like the Irish experience is glamorous or celebrated when it comes to immigration. Those brief scenes in New York nod to a very real history where migrants faced discrimination and anti-Catholic sentiment pretty much the second that they stepped off the boat in this time period. It's a reminder that the Guinness Empire wasn't, rising in a vacuum. It existed alongside millions of Irish people leaving home out of desperation and finding that the American dream wasn't exactly waiting for them with open arms. I think on the whole, there's a difference between telling a story about Ireland and telling one for Ireland, and the House of Guinness sits like somewhere in between, I think. I don't think this is a thing that Netflix is intentionally doing with this series specifically. And y'all know over here at Regency Rumors, we're not about everything needing to be historically accurate and like about death and disease or sadness all of the time. I do think period dramas should be an element of escapism sometimes. But it is getting to a point that Netflix and other platforms are aiming for universal looks and pacing that are received well internationally over national appeal. Every era now looks like it's filmed in the same warehouse with the same lighting rig, with the same kinds of dialogue and storytelling, in my opinion. The House of Guinness isn't a bad show. I've enjoyed it more than a lot of period dramas I've seen recently. So I'm not trying to completely contradict all the people that loved it, but I do feel like it's a symptom of how streaming platforms has polished history into something glossy and sexy over anything else. I think there are ways to make period dramas exciting and sometimes sexy and sleek, and it also be received well nationally and locally. Shows like Gentleman Jack pulled off critical success because they leaned into local specificity and universal themes. So what that tells me is you can have a globally appealing show that looks amazing and honors local culture, but you've got to do both. And if you lean into, tourism-friendly packaging, for lack of a better term, you risk the locals saying, that's not our story. And I feel like in the long run, that's not what these shows and the writers who spend so much time and the researchers and the actors who put so much work in want to happen with these shows. And so my hope is that if there is a season 2 of the House of Guinness, that they're not going to take away all the cool stuff that happens in the show and like that the characters aren't cool anymore, that sort of thing. I'm not trying to advocate for the show to be dark or sad or anything like that. But if there was more attention taken to the working class stories and that we see aspects of community and family, and it's not just about sexiness, I think that next season, so many things would go down better with audiences. And so my hope is that that's what they're going to try and do going forward. Well, that is it for me, guys. Thanks so much for watching this video. Did you enjoy the House of Guinness? I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer about this. I did really enjoy it, and I am looking forward to a new season. And I don't think it's something that needs to be completely criticized or thrown out. I do just think there are some small things that they can do, work with some historians a bit more to tell more nuanced stories of working class people's experiences. And they can do that in the rural settings, they can do that in Dublin, and they can do that over in the US if they're attempting to do this more ensemble cast thing that they're doing with this, the family, and then just add some more people in there other than, she's so pretty. I know the actress who plays Ellen, but like, there are more people, obviously, in this story. We see so many of the extras in the working class environment. Bring some more characters in here that are not just an angry mob, but have real stories that people can connect with. And I really think that it will enrich this show, and you can still keep the sexiness because the people are pretty. You could keep the pretty people, but just put a little bit more effort into some of the other stories. So yeah, let me know what you thought of the series and if you're looking forward to season 2. That's it for me. Bye.